It is always better to be the first committee to investigate, and it is always better to investigate as contemporaneously to an incident or to an event as can be done. Our committee did not have the luxury of either one of those. We began a year and a half after the incidents, but collectively and individually, all 7 of us believed that there were more questions to ask, that there were more answers to acquire, more witnesses to interview, more documents to access. And this report validates that belief. There is new information on what happened in Benghazi, and that information should fundamentally change the way you view what happened in Benghazi. And there are recommendations made to make sure it does not happen again.
And I think that if you will read the report, that you will see, as the chairman mentioned, that what was going on in Washington at 10:08 when the secretary made her first comments, we had men on the roof at the annex trying to protect their lives and the lives of the others Americans in Benghazi. If our fellow citizens will read this, they're going to come up with their own opinion of what happened, because there's enough new evidence that I think that people will be able to put together for themselves exactly what led up to this attack, what went on during the attack, and then the post-attack when there was so much misinformation that was being repeated by this administration.
At 10:08 that night, with Tyrone Woods still on the roof of the annex fighting for his life, Secretary Clinton issues this statement, the official statement on Benghazi, the official statement of our government that evening. Some have sought to justify this vicious behavior as a response to inflammatory material on the internet. We know that statement was misleading because an hour later she told her daughter, terrorists killed 2 of our people today. The next day she tells the Egyptian Prime Minister, we know the film had nothing to do with it. It was a planned attack, not a protest. And maybe the best example is from the 14th. Same day Mr. Rhodes issues his talking points. But that day we have Mr. Carney at a press briefing saying this, no information to suggest Benghazi was a pre-planned attack. No information to suggest a pre-planned attack. That same day, State Department official in Libya says this, Benghazi was a well-planned attack. You couldn't have a starker contrast than those 2 statements.
This was attack by radical Islamic terrorists on an American facility. There was no fog of war. There was no dispute, save for a few stray news reports. The evidence was very clear. Go read what Secretary Clinton herself said. Go read the words from other officials who were on the ground that night, communicating back to the most senior levels of government what had transpired that night. It wasn't about a YouTube video. It wasn't about a bunch of folks out for a walk. And when Secretary Clinton said, what difference does it make? We can now, as a result of our work over the last year and a half, tell you exactly what difference it makes.
But what we didn't know until this investigation was that the State Department made a conscious decision to keep the Benghazi compound off the radar and not provide it the security that it needed.
At the end of the day, no military assets were ever moving toward Benghazi. The bottom line is that Washington failed to have our guys' backs when they needed it.
How the situation in Libya was becoming more and more dangerous. Did you ever read any of these pieces?
Yes, as I've previously stated, we were certainly aware that the situation across Libya was becoming more dangerous and that there were particular concerns about eastern Libya.
Did you read the piece that was Libya, al-Qaeda establishing sanctuary?
I'm aware that that was certainly among the information provided to me.
There was another particular piece that was talked about after the IED attack that AFRICOM wrote. Al-Qaeda expands in Libya. Were you familiar with that?
I can't speak to specific pieces, Congressman, but I was well aware of the concerns we all had about the setting up of jihadist training camps and other activities in Libya, particularly in eastern Libya.
You were briefed in, I think, the CIA between January and September of 2012 had over 4,500 pages of intelligence. Were you aware of how many pages of intelligence? And I know you had a specific division, I guess, of the State Department under you that was called Intelligence and Research. Did they keep you up to speed on all these 400 cables or different things that they were getting? Did they keep you up to speed on that you were aware of them?
Congressman, I can't speak to specific reports, but I can certainly agree with you that I was briefed and aware of the increasingly dangerous upsurge in militant activity in Libya.
And so what did you do to make sure that our men and women over there were protected, knowing how much the threat had grown, especially in Benghazi? Because a lot of people say that really in the summer of 2012, the security in Benghazi was worse than it was during the revolution.
Well, Congressman, with respect to not only the specific incidents that you referenced earlier, but the overall concerns about Benghazi, I think I have stated previously, there was never any recommendation by anyone, the intelligence community, the Defense Department, the State Department officials responsible for Libya, to leave Benghazi, even after the two incidents that you mentioned, because in part, as I responded to Congressman Smith, we had so many attacks on facilities that, as I said, went back to 2001, that certainly also happened in other parts of the world while I was there. Each was evaluated, and there was not a recommendation. Furthermore, there was not even on the morning of September 11th, while Chris Stevens and Sean Smith were at the compound, Chris had spoken with intelligence experts. There was no credible, actionable threat known to our intelligence community against our compound.
Reclaiming my time, you said that the Ambassador Kritz was pulled out of Tripoli because of threats on his life.
There were threats from people associated with Gaddafi after the publication of cables he had written that were made public by WikiLeaks.
And you say you were aware of the two attacks at the mission facility in Benghazi. Mr. Morrell in his book states that there was 20 attacks on that facility. Are you familiar with the other 18?
There were two that we thought rose to the level of being serious.
Were you familiar with the other 18?
I'm not aware of 18 others. And I would point out, and I'm sure that former Deputy Director Morrell made this point when he was testifying, the CIA stayed in Libya. The CIA had a much bigger presence than the State Department, despite the overall decline in stability. Some might argue, actually, because of the overall decline in stability, it was thought to be even more important for the CIA to stay there. And they also did not believe that their facility would be the subject of a deadly attack either, because I think sometimes, sometimes the discussion gets pulled together when really we had Chris and Sean dying at the State Department compound, which we are discussing, and we had our other two deaths of Tyrone Woods and Glenn Doherty at the CIA annex.
Reclaiming my time for just a minute, and I do appreciate that. But if you talk to the CIA contractors that were at the annex and you ask them how they were armed and equipped, and then if you would or could talk to the diplomatic security agents that were at the facility, I think you will see that there was a big, big difference in the equipment that they had to protect themselves. But you knew of the two, what you call major incidents, but you don't recollect the other 18 that Mr. Morrell says happened. How many instances would it have taken you to say, hey, we need to look at the security over there? Would it have been 3 major instances, 30 instances, 40 instances, 50 instances? How many instances would you have been made aware of that would have made you say, hey, I don't care what anybody else says, we're going to protect our people. Chris Stevens is a good friend of mine. We're going to look after him. How many would it have taken?
Well, Congressman, of course, I made it abundantly clear that we had to do everything we could to protect our people. What I did not and do not believe any secretary should do was to substitute my judgment from thousands of miles away for the judgment of the security professionals who made the decisions about what kind of security would be provided. And I know that sounds somewhat hard to understand, but, you know, we have a process, and the experts who I have the greatest confidence in and who had been through so many difficult positions, because practically all of them had rotated through Afghanistan, Pakistan, Iraq, Yemen, other places. They were the ones making the assessment. No one ever came to me and said, we should shut down our compound in Benghazi.
I'm not saying shut it down. I'm saying protect it.
Well,
I'm not saying shut it down. I'm just saying protect it. And when you say security professionals, I'm not trying to be disparaging with anybody, but I don't know who those folks were, but
well, they were people who risked their lives to try to save.
Professional when it came to protecting people. But let me say this: you said that the mission that you gave Ambassador Stevens was to go in to investigate the situation. Now, if you're going to investigate a situation, it would seem to me like you would have to get out into the country to investigate that. And I don't know if you're aware of it or not, but there were not even enough diplomatic security for him to leave the compound without asking the CIA operatives to assist them. Were you aware of that?
Well, we had an agreement with the CIA to help supplement security and to come to the aid. It was a mutual agreement.
Was that a written agreement?
No, it was not a written agreement, but we are posted with the CIA in many places in the country. Okay. I mean, in the world, and it's important to have a good working relationship, and we did. And unfortunately, despite all the weapons and despite the fortification, 2 CIA contractors died at the CIA annex that night.
Just to follow up on one thing about Ambassador Stevens, you got a lot of emails from Sidney Blumenthal, and you say that Mr. Blumenthal was a friend of yours, and he had your personal email address. You say Chris Stevens was a friend of yours. He asked numerous times for extra protection. Now, if I had been Mr. Stevens, and I think anybody out there, anybody watching this would agree, if I had been Mr. Stevens and I'd had a relationship with you, and I had requested 20 or more times for additional security to protect not only my life, but the people that were there with me, I would have gotten in touch with you some way. I would have let you know that I was in danger and that the situation had deteriorated to a point I needed you to do something. Did he have your personal email?
Congressman, I do not believe that he had my personal email. He had the email, and he had the direct line to everybody that he'd worked with for years. He had been posted with officials in the State Department. They had gone through difficult, challenging, dangerous assignments together. He was in constant contact with people. Yes, he and the people working for him asked for more security. Some of those requests were approved, others were not. We're obviously looking to learn what more we could do. Because it was not only about Benghazi, it was also about the embassy in Tripoli. And I think it's fair to say that, you know, Chris asked for what he and his people requested because he thought that it would be helpful, but he never said to anybody in the State Department, you know what, we just can't keep doing this. We can't stay there. He was in constant contact with, you know, people on my staff, other officials in the State Department. And, you know, I did have an opportunity to talk with him and about the substance of the policy. But with respect to security, he took those requests where they belonged. He took them to the security professionals. And I have to add, Congressman, the diplomatic security professionals are among the best in the world. I would put them up against anybody. And I just cannot allow any comment to be in the record in any way criticizing or disparaging them. They have kept Americans safe in 2 wars and in a lot of other really terrible situations over the last many years. I trusted them with my life. You trust them with yours when you're on CODELs. They deserve better, and they deserve all the support that the Congress can give them because they're doing a really hard job very well.
Well, ma'am, all I can say is that they missed something here, and we lost 4 Americans.
Gentleman's time.